Famine in northern Gaza is imminent, and the question of who is responsible is becoming an increasingly thorny political issue for the Biden administration. Israeli English language spokesperson Ilan Levy has been suspended from his post, according to Haaretz, after claiming that, quote, there are no limits on the entry of food, water, medicine, or shelter equipment into Gaza, in an exchange with British Foreign Secretary David Cameron on Twitter. The tweet was subsequently deleted. Top EU official Joseph Borrell has accused Israel of provoking famine, saying, quote, famine is not a natural disaster. It is not a flaw. It is not an earthquake. It is entirely man-made. And Biden's plan to build a pier to deliver aid to Gaza rather than use one of the many land entry points accessible through Israel has heightened the extent to which our U.S. ally, Israel, is not in alignment with stated U.S. policy goals. State Department spokesperson Vedant Patel was questioned on whether Israel is using food as a weapon of war. Let's take a listen.
The UN Human Rights Chief, Mr. Turk, said to say that Israel may be using food or lack of food as a weapon of war, which of course would be a war crime. Does the U.S. have a reaction to his remarks?
So let me just say that is not something that we have observed or witnessed, but we continue to be deeply concerned about the report that's indicating that famine is imminent in Gaza.
Here to weigh in on all of that is Middle East expert from the Quincy Institute of Responsible Statecraft, Dr. Trita Parsi. Welcome back, Dr. Parsi.
Thank you.
I'd like to ask you to weigh in first on that clip and in general the responses that we've been getting from the Biden administration when asked to weigh in on what appears to be obvious to many observers, that there simply just isn't the number of food trucks that are being allowed into Gaza that were previously being allowed into Gaza prior to October 7th. And then as a consequence, humanitarian experts from around the world say famine is imminent.
It is stunning to see how the administration is essentially doing everything it can to protect the Israelis and denying things that are just so obvious for people to see. But I think we have to admit one thing, which is that so far the administration has actually succeeded in making sure that it's not being fully called out, at least not by the mainstream media, and as a result has managed to be ahead when it comes to forming the narrative about this. We see a systematic effort by the administration to always going for the least obvious, the most ineffective option, but yet we refuse to accept the most obvious explanation as to why the administration is doing this, which is the simple reality that is actually in on this, that it is working in tandem with the Netanyahu government on all of these matters. It is not so that it is being led or misled by the Netanyahu government. It is not so that it is being frustrated and trying to deal with these issues privately behind the scenes. The reality, the much more simpler explanation for all of this is that the Biden administration is in on it, and it is working to make sure that the Israelis are getting maximum protection to be able to continue this war. And all the administration is doing is try to reduce the most excessive measures that the Israelis are taking in order to reduce the political pressure international in Israel to stop. And that then makes it an effort not to end this war, but actually to allow it to continue with the least amount of resistance from the international community and from the public here in the United States.
Talk to us more about the delivery of supplies to the region and how that's impacting the crisis. I might suspect that some Americans, even if they don't necessarily support what is going on or an escalation of war or there being this humanitarian crisis, might nevertheless wonder why we are responsible for getting supplies at all into a region where our ally is still at war with the governing authority. It feels like we're funding both sides of the conflict. We're funding to have the region destroyed in order to defeat Hamas, and then we're also funding to have it rebuilt. That's a lot for the American taxpayer to shoulder.
Certainly, and I think it goes back to what I said earlier on. These are efforts to essentially make it look as if we're doing something to stop the war, or to alleviate human suffering, whereas in reality, it's a strategy to allow it to continue. If we truly wanted the humanitarian suffering to end, the obvious answer is to end the war. go for a ceasefire, not veto all of these resolutions at the UN, put pressure on all sides, including the Israelis, to get a ceasefire. We're not doing that. We're pursuing the least obvious option, which is to build the port, not even use the land route, to get not American aid in, but international aid in. The fact that we're then, and on top of that, providing American aid through airdrops, which is also an ineffective and problematic way of doing it, just goes back to the earlier point. Why is the Biden administration continuously, systematically pursuing the least obvious option, yet we refuse to accept the most obvious explanation for it, which is at the end of the day, they're working in tandem with the Netanyahu government. The Biden administration is in on this. And sadly, that means that what is happening in Gaza is not just on Israel, it's also on the United States.
I want to ask you specifically about the most recent Al-Shifa hospital raid. Obviously, this isn't the first time a raid has happened. And last time, there was a whole media circus around the fact that the IDF had anticipated that there was going to be a Hamas headquarters that was extensive underneath the hospital. That did not materialize. That did seem to be a turning point in how the public discussed about the likelihood or possibility of Israel intentionally attacking a hospital. Hospitals, which are, of course, are targets that are not legitimate targets under international law unless there is evidence of some substantial military entrenchment there. The fact that this has happened again, then, is interesting. And the Israeli justification this time has been that they have killed a senior Hamas commander. Different reporting characterizes that person as a police officer that works for Hamas to the extent that all the civil society in Gaza is Hamas. But I wondered if you could tease out what is going on there and what we know so far about the legitimacy or lack thereof of the attack on Al-Shifa hospital.
I think, again, the Israelis have failed to produce any evidence that has been convincing to the international community that Al-Shifa was being used as a base for Hamas. And in fact, the fact that the U.S. first came out and said that they had intelligence on this turned out to be false, because what they were using apparently was Israeli intelligence. So it's the same kind of stuff that we saw around 9/11, in which intelligence was being recycled and making it look as if it came from several different directions, whereas in reality, that wasn't the case. We've also seen, incidentally, that behind the scenes, the administration knew very early on that the Israelis were using indiscriminate bombings, but didn't say anything about it until December 12th, when Biden at a private fundraiser talked about it as indiscriminate, but they knew about it already on October 27th and continued to provide support, continued to sidestep the Congress twice to get weapons to the Israelis even sooner, even though they already knew 3 weeks into the war that the Israelis were not following any of the rules, were not bombing targets based on adequate intelligence. And the hospital is just a culmination of all of that neglect and American complicity in this.
You said earlier that you don't really think Biden is particularly or necessarily being deceived or duped, but actually just full-throatedly supports what Netanyahu is doing. Well, in that case, is really the deception by him on the American people?
Well, mindful of the fact that the administration knew on October 27th that the Israelis were using indiscriminate bombing, that they were targeting buildings without adequate intelligence, knew that all of these things would amount to war crimes, but still continue to provide support for it, continue to defend it publicly, continue to say that the Hamas numbers on, the numbers on deaths in Gaza were not trustworthy because they came from Hamas. That's what the administration said. All of these different things definitely point to a degree of dishonesty with the American public about this. Mindful of the fact that we're providing the weapons and enabling this war, if the administration knew that war crimes were being committed by the Israelis and yet deny that publicly and deny that to anyone in the United States that we're pointing it out, that it's difficult to characterize as anything else than misleading the public.
I just want to ask you, as we close here, Dr. Parsi, you know, this has been a political boondoggle for Biden. And so I do wonder if what you're saying is true, if Joe Biden is fully or at least substantially committed to the Israeli policy project, whatever it may be, in Gaza. Why do you think that is? What advantage is there for the United States geopolitically or Joe Biden politically to remain in lockstep with Netanyahu's far-right government that's getting a lot of pushback even within Israel for various reasons?
I think that Biden may very well himself genuinely believe that this is the right choice, that this is the moral choice. And I think if that's the case, we have an even deeper problem, because it means that the president is seeing what is happening and thinks that this is right. In some of the reporting that we've seen on this, it indicates that Biden is very frustrated that the public is not seeing that what he is doing is right, which means that in his view, the kind of support that he's provided with Israel that has created this impunity, that has led to more than 30,000 people killed, in his view is nevertheless the right choice. So the price the innocent people in Gaza are paying for Israel going after Hamas in Biden's narrative is worth the price. That's even worse, in my view, in that sense. But I do also want to say something. You know, the narrative that is being created, that he's being frustrated with Netanyahu, may very well be true, but it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant what he feels about this. What's relevant is what does he do about this? And none of that supposed frustration has so far led to any meaningful pressure on Israel to change course. And as a result, it really is irrelevant as to whether he's personally feeling frustrated. He's the president. He's in charge. He should be pursuing policies that actually makes America safe and making sure that the U.S. is not dragged into larger wars. And if he's frustrated with a foreign leader that is consistently undermining U.S. interests in the region, then it's on him to do something about it rather than just spreading narratives about how frustrated he is.
Dr. Parsi, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.